Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm discussing Little Shop of Horrors, which is originally a 1960 horror comedy film, The Little Shop of Horrors, written by Charles B. Griffith and directed by Roger Corman. And it is a farce about an inadequate florist's assistant who cultivates a plant that feeds on human blood. But the main version everyone knows and loves is the musical, which premiered off-Broadway in 1982, before then moving to off-Broadway, and then eventually to Broadway in 2003, so it worked its way up. And the music is by Alan Menken, with book and lyrics by the late Howard Ashman. I've mentioned both of them before. They worked on several projects together, of course, including the Disney Renaissance era films The Little Mermaid and also Beauty and the Beast, which was Howard Ashman's final project before he passed away, sadly. And Alan Menken, amazing composer, also composed the music for my all-time favorite Disney movie, Aladdin, also Pocahontas, and Hercules, and many, many other Disney films. He also did the music for Newsies. I talked about that musical last year. And I first saw Little Shop of Horrors back when I was in college. And the reason I went to go see it was because one of my sorority sisters was in it. And the production was amazing. Such great performances with the songs. And I remember with Audrey too, the giant plant, there were two people doing the puppeteering for it. So one person working the head and doing the voice for it, and the other person doing the vines, the leaves, the arms, whatever you want to call them. So that was really cool. And my favorite thing about the musical is, of course, the music. I love the songs. And Alan Menken did the music in the style of early 1960s rock and roll, doo-wop, and early Motown. And I love that influence. And you hear it, of course, in the opening numbers with Skid Row Downtown and, the interstitials with the doo-wop, with those three women, these kind of Greek chorus. The three women, their names are Crystal, Ronette, and Chiffon. So my sorority sister was one of the three doo-wop women, and she's really short, so they kind of added that. They played around like using her physicality with the humor of it. That I will say, seeing it live, it's much different, because I just recently now watched the movie adaptation, the 1986 movie adaptation, which was, the screenplay was also written by Howard Ashman with music by Alan Menken, and it was directed by Frank Oz, who of course is a well-known puppeteer, part of Jim Henson Company. He originally performed as Miss Piggy, Fozzie Bear, Animal, and Sam Eagle in The Muppet Show, and he also performed as Cookie Monster, Bert, and Grover in Sesame Street. So really, really talented puppeteer, because of course Audrey too in the movie is this giant puppet. And evidently there are talks of doing a remake, because everything needs to be remade, every single thing, good God, but whatever. So that's apparently in the works. So I'm sure that'll be like CGI though at some point, because of course. But anyway, the 1986 movie is fantastic. In particular, Rick Moranis as Seymour is so perfectly cast. And then we have Ellen Greene as Audrey, and we have Steve Martin as Orrin, the sadistic dentist. And that's like, he adds so much to the humor with that, in particular, has that role. Fantastic, so funny, my God. But Rick Moranis in particular as Seymour is just so perfect, because Seymour, he comes off as this loser, but really he's not at all, of course, as we know, that he is extremely smart and he has this charm to him. And what I really love about Audrey and Seymour, with their character arcs, both of them, that they are similar in the sense that both of them don't know their own self-worth, but that they both encourage one another and see greatness in one another, but that they can't see that for themselves. How Audrey is physically abused by her horrible boyfriend, Orrin, and Like, she has her black eye and her arm in a cast, and it's terrible. And even the boss, Mushnick, Mr. Mushnick, saying, this guy beating up on you again, you need a nice guy. And then she's saying, well, if I leave him, I'm scared of what he'll do to me. That's terrible. Oh my God. But, since this is a comedy, they do that, they balance that well with all the serious stuff in it, because even that premise of this bloodthirsty plant, how that can be extremely dark, but since this is a farce, that balances it out. Because I will say personally, I'm just not into horror, the genre. I have respect for the genre in its place in storytelling and in pop culture with really well-known popular horror films, of course, but I'm just personally not into just watching movies that scare me and then, having nightmares about it. It just freaks me out, but even knowing it's, fake, of course, but, things that just get into your head, also with psychological thrillers, that stuff just is oh, no, it's too much to me. So I much prefer comedies in general. So that's why this is perfect. It's got the good balance of it. And it's a great story, but what I don't like at all, and this is jumping ahead, but I don't like the original ending at all. I watched both versions of the movie. They apparently didn't release the original ending until 2012, so for the longest time it wasn't available, and it is originally a 23-minute finale based on the musical's ending, but then it was rewritten and reshot after test audiences did not react positively to it. So I'm honestly glad, because in general, we do prefer happy endings. We want that feel good. We want to have felt that it was worth going on this journey with the characters. And so I'll get to the ending, but also when I saw the musical too, when I was in college, our college production of it, they went with the happy ending too. So I was happy with that. But again, I love the songs. And what's hilarious is that long before seeing the musical, the one song I had known was Somewhere That's Green, because I remember there's a scene in Family Guy that does that song. I thought, oh, this is a nice song. I didn't know it was a real song from the musical, Little Shop of Horrors. I thought they made up this song. It was weird. And that's with Herbert. If you know Family Guy, but you could look it up if it's just so awkward though. If you're not familiar with the show and with that character, it's ew, but so whatever. That's all I'll say about that. But I love that song, Somewhere That's Green, how she wants a better life for herself, of course, and then talking about Seymour too. And then I love, of course, Suddenly Seymour, beautiful song, that duet. And Audrey in the movie, though, she has such a unique voice, but she sings much deeper compared to her speaking voice. It's interesting. I don't know, it's kind of jarring to me. It's a great performance, of course. But what's also funny is that I see also there is an episode of, I see now in hindsight, there's an episode of American Dad where Roger the alien. I love American Dad. I gotta talk about that. It's just that show's still going, so it's hard to discuss it when it's still going, but I could talk about just my all-time favorites, I guess. Anyway, there's an episode where Roger, one of his personas takes on a life of its own, Sidney Huffman. So then that's clearly, I see now it's influenced by Seymour Krelborn, and the woman, I don't remember, maybe her name is Audrey also in that episode. The episode's called The One That Got Away, I think. It's season 2. It's an earlier season episode, but I know I'm going on a tangent. Bear with me a moment. But anyway, so that character, though, is definitely based on Audrey, because she's abused by the boyfriend. She has that kind of high-pitched voice, so, and blonde hair too, so it's definitely based on the movie version of Audrey, is my point. So, anyway, so the movie is really great, though, with the decor of it, too, how it still feels like a stage play in a way, but, since it's a movie with going to different locations. Again, live theater, I miss, going to see shows. The last show I saw was actually last year. I took my sister to see the Broadway musical version of Mean Girls, and in fact, now they are doing a movie based on the musical, so we've come full circle from the movie to a musical about the movie to now a movie about the musical, so there we go. Anyway, pardon all my derailments, but they're all connected. It's connected because, this was a Broadway production, and I love the Broadway soundtrack. So the opening song, though, Skid Row, downtown, they all want to get out of Skid Row, besides the prologue, Little Shop of Horrors, but how they all want to get out of I gotta get out of here, Seymour singing and Audrey singing, because Seymour, when we meet him, he just works at that florist shop with Mushnick. And I thought Mushnick was more of like a jerk, but he's not that bad. It's just like he has this failing business. He's not as bad, of course, compared to Oren, this horrible, sadistic, messed up dentist who loves inflicting pain on people. And what's absolutely hysterical that is not in the musical, that is only in the movie version, and it's just so random, it doesn't add anything to the plot, but it's hysterical to me, is that there is a scene where Bill Murray shows up, and the character's name is Arthur Denton, and he is a masochistic patient, so he gets off on pain. And it's so funny when he's like sitting there excitedly, and then one of the patients comes out and all his headgear. He's like, "Oh, what did he do?" And she's like, "Oh," trying to explain. He's like, "Oh, yeah, that's right, you have to do that." And then Oren is working on his mouth, and then he's like, "Oh yeah," like it's so awkward. He's just like is really enjoying himself, and then Oren throws him out, and he's like, "What a sicko!" Like trying to he wanted a long, slow root canal. Oh my god, absolutely hilarious. And that's when Seymour comes in. And he wants to he's going to kill him to feed. I know I'm jumping ahead, to feed him to Audrey too. So what's interesting is that Audrey too, so the plant that Seymour cultivates and then it grows and grows, when he discovers that it feeds off of human blood, when he's feeding it his own blood, like drops of his blood, and then it keeps growing bigger and bigger. And that is what leads to the success of the Mushnick flower shop. And also in the musical, there's a whole thing with Mushnick and Son, where then they team up, like Mushnick using Seymour. It's like, "Oh, you'll be my son, we'll work together." So that's not in the movie though, because there's a whole song with that. And with Audrey 2 growing bigger and bigger. But in the original film, Audrey 2 was actually named Audrey Jr. And I wonder why they changed it, because to me that kind of makes more sense naming it Audrey Jr. So, I don't know. And also what's interesting is that since in the movie it's a puppet, of course, a giant puppet, and with the voice, but it's a male voice because it's named Audrey too, so you would think it was a female. Because when I saw the musical, they had a woman doing the voice. So that kind of made more sense to me, oddly enough. I know it doesn't matter, it's a plant, but, this monstrous plant. There's a part when it sings about being from outer space, too. I had forgotten about that, too. Or that was in the movie, at least. I don't know if that was in the musical. So when he sees that overnight success, and then, they're getting all this attention with the plant in the window, it's like, "Oh, I see this strange plant in the window." The purposely, hammed up acting in the movie is fantastic, because that adds to the humor of it, so it's so funny. And also when we are introduced in the movie to Steve Martin's character, because he's on a motorcycle, Oren, and it's funny, he's got this Elvis vibe to him with his slicked back hair, and then singing about how he's a dentist, the song "Dentist!" ! "'Cause I'm a dentist." He likes inflicting pain. What a sick bastard. Good God. And there's that one where he's just talking about his mom, and he has a shrine of his mom in the closet. Really weird. Good God. And poor Audrey, oh God, terrible. So when she sings about wanting a better life for herself, and then somewhere that's green, and just a simple life that she wants with their kids, and we'll snuggle watching Lucy on our big enormous 12-inch screen, because also this is set in the early 1960s. They talk about a lot with Audrey too, how this could be the next big thing, biggest thing since hula hoops, since that was big at the time too. So that's funny, the specific references. And I had forgotten the fact that Audrey is actually a colleague of Seymour, that she works at the floral shop as well. I don't know why I had thought that she just comes in one day, but so yeah, they work together. And they have that connection right off the bat though, where they both see greatness in each other, and that they both need to work on their self-esteem. Poor Audrey, poor Seymour. And with all this attention, that he doesn't really know what to make of it. So then when it's so huge, and then it sings "Feed me," "Feed me, Seymour," this giant monstrous plant. So then afterwards, when he's going, it's you can't think of anyone that deserves to die and be plant food. And then I can think of one person, and of course it's Oren. That's when he goes there, and that's when Bill Murray is there. So then when he throws him out, then Seymour comes in, then he was going to shoot him. He's like, "Oh, what's that? You got a revolver?" And then he had put on the whole thing with the nitrous oxide, the laughing gas, and he's laughing hysterically, and then he can't get it off, and then he dies. So Seymour didn't have to kill him. Then he takes his body and chops it up, That's when Mushnik sees. Then he feeds it to Audrey 2. Audrey 2 gets bigger. And then Mushnik's saying, like, threatening him with the gun. So that's when he, like, turned more evil, because, like, he doesn't want to see the plant go, because that's what's bringing all this money to the business. And then he ends up getting fed. He's eaten alive by, like, Audrey 2 eats him alive, Mushnik. They kind of gloss over that, though. Like, there's the whole thing, though, like, in the movie specifically or it's like, the police talk to Audrey saying, Audrey saying, he went missing. And then there's nothing really about Mushnik, how he went missing or whatever. But then when she runs off, then they sing Suddenly Seymour. And, like, that's when they kiss then. Like, they're kind of, like, professing their love. I love that song. It's such a beautiful song. So great. I love that one. That's probably my favorite in this musical. And then they want to franchise there's that businessman that wants to franchise Audrey 2, sell a bunch of Audrey 2s around the world. And then when of course, Audrey 2 still wants to eat. So then he steps out to go get more food. And then that's when it calls up Audrey. And then it's like she's amazed that it can talk and everything. And that's when it goes to eat her. So this is where the original ending versus the updated ending comes in. In the original ending, it's about to eat her, and then Seymour comes back, wrangles it free, and then takes her out back. He's like, "Don't die, Audrey." And then she's saying, "Seymour, like, I want you to feed me to the plant. That way, we can be together." And then she sings her last reprise of Somewhere That's Green. And then she says the line, like, which is funny, that's like, "And when I die, which should be very shortly," like, oh, poor Audrey. So then that's it. And then she sings that last reprise, and then she dies. So then he feeds Audrey to Audrey. So that's really devastating. So then she's gone. So what I will say is that in a weird way, what she's saying, like, then we could be together, you could just make a better life for yourself. So that to me could have worked, though. Like, her sacrificing herself so then he can be on his, like, he could make a better life for himself afterwards, like getting rid of, since she was going to die anyway, just then, like, you can raise the plans, like, we'll be together. So that could have worked to me. But then what happens is then he's going to commit suicide. That's when that guy shows up. Like, he's on a building about to jump. Then the guy's like, "I want to make all these Audrey 2s. What do you say?" For, like, in every household in America. And then he goes back to Audrey 2 saying, "That's what your plan all along, wasn't it? Just this killer plant wanting to take over." So then there's that face-off where he, like, shoots at it, and then the vines grow bigger and bigger. He grows out of his pot, Audrey 2, and then he grabs Seymour and eats him. And then he spits out his glasses. So upsetting. I was like, oh no. So I knew already about this original ending, but then seeing it, was like, oh God. And it's weird. It's just like, it doesn't even feel depressing, oddly enough. It just feels kind of, to me, truly, it feels kind of anticlimactic. It's like, okay, so what was the point of this whole story? And then, like, the three women sing the ending song about, like, how that it spread, like, all these Audrey 2s all over the nation. People, like, were caught up in the craze, and then they all grew, then it's, like, monstrous and, like, destroying the town, and then it's just the end. So that's how it ends. So what I don't like about it is that, and that is also the original grim, like, it's the original ending in, like, the more grim and depressing ending, I guess, in the original movie. But in the original movie, what happened was that, which they didn't do in the 1986 adaptation, was that when the buds opened up, you would see the faces of its victims. So you saw Orrin, you saw Mushnik, you saw Audrey, and then eventually you see Seymour. And then eventually, like, the plant wilts and dies, apparently. So that was more interesting to me, actually, like, taking on a new life with them, like, with the people that it ate. So my whole point, though, is that with that ending, with them eating, with Audrey eating everyone, and eating our hero, Seymour, that just comes off as, well, why did we go through that whole journey just to see him die too, and just to see this plant take over? That's not as interesting of a story at all. What I could have lived with, like I said, was just Audrey having been eaten, and then Seymour just making a new life for himself, and that they're still together in that way somehow with Audrey too. So that's what I personally would have preferred if they had gone with that. What I don't like is that then Seymour's gone, then the lesson is don't feed the plants. That's like the last song, don't feed the plants. So that's like dumb to me. I just don't care for it at all. And I'm glad that they rewrote the ending, even though apparently they wanted to stick to that original ending, but I'm glad they rewrote it and reshot it. And it's so funny though, because then watching the new version, it's about 10 minutes long as opposed to 20 minutes long. And you could see where they cut and then reshot. It's just funny. It's like when she passes out, he's like, Audrey, and then like he picks her back up. So that's like where it's the new version of it then. And I prefer it then because then it's them talking about how it's like, well, I did all this because they were going to get married. And then it's like, we can run off and get married. I'll get the money. We can then run off and get married tonight. And so then she's in her wedding dress, in the white dress. They'll go to the city hall and get married. And then he's in his suit. And then he's saying how it's like, well, I did all this because you never would have liked me otherwise. Like when I saw the success. And she thinks, you really think I didn't like you? Like, this is why I liked you? But then she's saying, like, I liked you before that. And he's saying, oh, Audrey. And then they sing again a reprise of Suddenly Seymour. And that's when then that business guy, I think his name was Patrick Martin or whatever, he shows up and he's like, excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt your singing. So it was much funnier and cheekier. I preferred that. So then what they did was they had the face off again with Seymour and Audrey too. And then they just added shots of Audrey looking in through the window. And then he's like, this has to end now. And then there's a part when he's saying, oh, from outer space. Then him kind of outwitting the Audrey 2 plant. And then the Audrey 2 is like dismembering the whole Mushnik floral shop. So then it all caves in. And then we think for a moment, did he die too, Seymour? But then he takes a cord and he puts it against another cord and it electrocutes Audrey 2. Then Audrey 2 is defeated, and then in the rubble, Audrey's walking through, and then Seymour and her reunite, and it's so much more happy and meaningful. And then they get married, they have the house that she wanted, and then there's just a little hint of then a new Audrey 2, with then just smiles, and then that. So it's a much better ending to me, much more fulfilling, and I really, really much prefer that ending. That's just me. So, and obviously most people agreed, since that's what they went with, since audiences were not fond of the original ending. And the big reason for that, they said, was because in theater, when the main characters die, then the actors come out and take a bow. But in movies, you don't have that. Then it's like, then that's it. And you just have this killer plant. So it's not as satisfying at all. So I much prefer that ending. I'm glad they went with that. So it's just a really great musical, fantastic songs, and love the love story with Seymour and Audrey. It's really sweet. I love that happy ending. It's so much better to me. And with sweet understanding, Seymour is my friend. And with that, that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. As always, you can follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Be sure to check out storytellingsaga.com, and feel free to send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by emailing me at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, let us make it abundantly clear: if you hate life, truly hate the sun, and need to smoke and drink coffee, you are goth. I will be discussing the South Park Goth Kids. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love. Suddenly